What up, though? Welcome to the FatBoy MMA podcast, where we talk about everything combat sports, but mainly MMA. If you want to hear a couple regular MMA fans talk about MMA history, notable fighters, up-and-coming fighters, and everything in between, then this is the podcast for you. Now, I should warn you, we're not professionals, but we are big fans of combat sports. Now, if that sits good with you, grab a beverage, sit back, relax, and let's go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the FatBoy MMA podcast. I am your host, DC. And of course, I got my co host here with me, Locke.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
So, we have two special guests in the building, and they were both on the last podcast, and we're doing something that we haven't done before. We actually are having a part two to one of our podcasts, and I'll explain why in a bit. But let me go ahead and let you know who we got on the podcast. So we have a returning guest that has been on more podcasts than anybody else other than myself and Locke. We have TJ back on the podcast.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
And of course, we have Holaday. He was on the last one also. And as I said, he's one of those favorites, so we had to have him back. But now we're having him back for fisticuffs. Say what's up to the people, Holiday.
What up, though?
Okay, so the reason why we are doing this part two, I felt like on the last one, which was the men's pound for pound, I felt like a lot of people had more to say. In particular, there was a couple times where Holiday wanted to jump in and say something, and I kind of halted it a little bit because we try to follow a format where we stay under an hour, kind of get everything out. But I felt like more was needed. So I kind of reached out to everybody and asked them what they thought about a part two where I didn't have any specific agenda, no specific questions or anything like that. And it would allow everybody to ask any questions, do any rebuttals, anything like that that they wanted to do, or anything that they forgot to throw in from the last podcast. So before I kick this off, I do want to clarify one thing that I noticed when I was listening back to the other podcasts, I think may have been lost in the pound for pound definition. And I'm not going to read it again. You can go back and listen to the men's pound for pound, or you can go back and listen to the Amanda Nunes pound for pound episode to hear that definition. But one of the things that I thought was lost a little bit before we even get to skill for skill, a lot of other things are looked at in that person to even get them to that point. So if you remember, the whole thing of how it came about was that Sugar Ray Robinson was so good and he was dominating everybody. So he already had all of these things that it's no point in going down the road or talking about that because he had it. He was dominating. He was beating everybody. He looked unbeatable. And that's what brought upon, you know what? Let's compare him against other people because there's obviously no comparison in the weight class that he's in based upon what he's able to do to other people. So the main point I want to make sure, and this touches on something that you mentioned too, Holiday, when you talked about a lot of times when you look at smaller fighters, you would, their skill level, you would automatically say they would beat the bigger guy because they have so much stuff, right? The biggest guy to heavyweight that beats everybody up, he's the baddest man on the planet, period. He's going to demolish everybody else in those lower weight classes. That's why this is a mythical type of deal to say, hey, but what if a guy with this skill level went up against him? But we're only talking about people that are at the top of the heap. So when, you throw in other things like strength of schedule, who they beat, what they can do, their record, all of that kind of goes without saying to me because we're only talking about people at the top of the heap. There's a very skilled, flyweight that's ranked number 20. He's not going to be in this conversation, right? So I just wanted to clarify that before we opened it up because it sounded like that was missed in translation a little bit. And I'm actually just going to open up the floor. So I know everybody had a chance to kind of review the last podcast and come up with different things, jog their memory about whatever they may have wanted to say. So literally, I'm going to open up the floor for anybody that wanted to bring up a point, present something, an argument, anything like that. If nobody wants to go first, of course, I got mine.
Well, before we even get into that, the one thing that I wanted to say is I'm glad that we're even having this issue, that we got to fire this back up to discuss it again. Because if you remember when we discussed the women's pound for pound, that shit was such a train wreck. Like you got ladies that are coming off of back-to-back losses in the top 5.
Right.
It was tough. So
Yes.
when we were discussing that, I kind of checked out the men's pound for pound for a second, and this is a much more pleasant discussion to be having, as opposed to discussing disaster records and how you rank them.
I agree. Plus, I think, based on the last conversation, everybody had somebody that wasn't listed on SureDog or UFC's pound for pound. And I think they were all good arguments.
And I think
As I think as long as Davison Figueroa is on anybody's pound for pound, it's an illegitimate list. That's all I'm gonna say.
DC, you were the only one that got to say all 10 though, right? Didn't the rest of us only do the top 5? Because I know I only did my top 5.
Yeah, you ran off 5. I think yours was pretty quick. The issue was TJ did a dissertation, and and then Holiday dived in and was like, "Listen, your dissertation wasn't quite long enough. Can I get some more?" And then so that's what kind of happened. But anybody that
I
wants
was
to
trying to pass my senior exam, man. Come on.
anybody that wants to run off their full top 10 list, like I said, today's open. You can do that also. Whatever you guys got.
I would go into like my 6 through 10, but like it's been a second, so like now I have to go through and look at the list again and reformulate it. I'll throw one thing out there, and I think I called out the Max Holloway thing. Holiday asked me about it. It was like, how would you have him for pound number one if you think he didn't lose those 2 fights? And I feel like I didn't dig deeper into it, but just to kind of give you guys some my thought process. One, besides being 100% biased because I'm a huge Max Holloway fan, I still feel like if you didn't do enough to convincingly win a decision, like if a decision, like while I think Volk has never beat Max in my personal opinion, I still think Max left it close enough that there was room for a judge to misinterpret a decision in that point. And I think that's what keeps me from giving him that number 1 pound for pound in my book. I think had he have won that fight, not a lot of people would be really pushing back on him being in that number 1, 2, or 3 spot.
I definitely agree with that.
So my thing on that was, and I get it, right? But it's like, let's say you be like, okay, I would have had him number 1, but because of this, that, and the third, I got him 2 or 3. It seemed like it's relatively speaking when you're only doing a top 10, a jump from 1 to 4 seems to be a pretty big jump, especially when you think that the person actually won, and we're talking we're talking skill set and not necessarily records, right? So we know that records are a part of it, but as we said before, you know, I can't think of nobody right now, but you might have somebody that's on a crazy win streak, but they beat a bunch of nobody, so their record is blah 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 irrelevant, type of a deal. So it seems to be weird that you would jump from 1 to 4. But the funny part is, after thinking about it, I think that's the rest of, like, I think you ESPN, you see what I'm saying? Because that's what ESPN do with Kobe. They were like, Kobe is the closest thing to Jordan. So what number is he? 10. Like, wait a minute. So you got Jordan 1. You say Kobe is the closest thing to Jordan, but he's 10. I don't get it.
Let me say something before TJ dive back in, because as you know, Volkanovski is on my list and Max isn't on my list. So for similar reasons, right? But I think the way that I look at it, and it's really similar to what what TJ said, but also going back to me re-clarifying, the definition of pound for pound, right? All of those other things, is not that they're not factors. Your record has to be a factor. It's just we're measuring you once you get to a point where you've checked all these other boxes, where we have to measure you against other people. Or to what TJ was saying in the last one where he said, which I don't believe, especially right now that Russia is attacking people. I do not believe, I want to go on record saying FatBoy MMA and DC does not believe that Khabib retired to duck Usman. I just want to say that. Shout out to Khabib and all the Russians. But on a serious note,
I think you should bleep out any terms of Russia, Russian, or Russian attacking people if you're putting this on YouTube. Otherwise, no one will hear this.
as you
Yes,
repeated
Khabib
and said
ducked
really
Khmer
close in the
Usman.
microphone. But to the point of what I was.
Khabib ducked Kobe and Usman.
So
That's always how when you know TJ's about to be condescending as fuck, he gets real close to the mic.
so in the
Imagine working with me.
so in that, what I think when I look at it, right, Volkanovski hasn't lost in the UFC. That record, that plays a factor, right? And he's beat a lot of the same people that Max beat, but also he has that edge over Max. It would be very hard for me to have you as a champion and no losses in the UFC, and you can't even crack the top 10 of the pound for pound list when you've beat UFC legends, right? Even if they were close fights. And so, to TJ's point, although those fights were close, I think the difference is, especially, and I kind of made this point last time, especially when you're the bigger man, I expect you to be able to close out, especially that second fight, right? I can give you a close first fight. You got to be able to make the right adjustments to close out that second fight. And when you can't do that, the first fight may have dropped you a notch or two. The second fight has to drop you more than that, right? And that actually leads me over to something I was going to say to you, Holiday, that I mentioned, but I don't think I said the right things to clarify. When we were talking about reach, and I was talking about Max being the bigger man, and you said basically on the teletape, Volkanovski had the longer reach, which I didn't go and find the teletape. I'm just taking you at your word that he had the longer reach. And the part that I alluded to, but I don't think I did a good job of qualifying, especially if you don't already know this, not meaning you, but a person. Reach is measured with your arms out, stretched out like a T, and your fist balled up and it's fist to fist. So it goes all the way across your back. It's not your arm length, right? So if you have a very wide back and short arms, you can have a longer reach than somebody else with a short back and long arms. But that larger back plays well in grappling. Those longer arms play better in striking, especially when you're talking about boxing, which is what Max does. And you combine that with how he turns over his punches where his shoulder comes forward, it gives him that much longer of a reach. That's basically what I was trying to say before, but I don't think I did a good job of saying it. And a lot of people may not know how reach is calculated, but that's actually how it's calculated. It's your arms out in the T and it's going all the way across from end to end, not your actual arm length, which makes a big difference in striking.
Got you. Yeah, that makes sense. No, I did know that. You didn't ask me a question, but to answer the question, I did know that. It was literally just one of those things. I had just watched the fight, and I was like, one of the first thing they said, even though Holloway is the taller man, he is the blah blah blah. You know, I was about to say something else, but the other brother got said he had the said he had the reach. But what I was going to say about your what's the name? You said that but Volk, he's undefeated in the UFC, and then he beat legends. When you say legends in this context, are you meaning legends, meaning like they're not just how do I explain it? Skillful legends at their time. And the reason why I asked, I had his what's name up, which I'm trying to go back to find it. And I just freaking had it up. But I'm gonna try to go off of memory. It was like I think he fought Ortega. Okay, this it. Okay, yeah. So he fought Chan Sung Young,
Hmm.
Brian Ortega, Max Holloway twice, Otto Mendez, Derek Elkins, Jeremy Kennedy. And how far back? I don't want to go too far back.
He hasn't fought the Korean Zombie yet. The Young,
That's
that's
his
the
next
fight
fight.
coming
Oh,
up.
that's
Yeah,
coming up. Okay,
yeah.
yeah,
He
yeah,
got
yeah.
Young got a title shot.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So Brian Ortega, Max Holloway twice, Aldo Mendez. I'm assuming off of your statement, you're classifying Holloway and Aldo, or are you also giving Mendez the legend status too in Ortega?
Um, I don't think Ortega has reached kind of that legend status, but in general, when we're talking about top of the heap type guys, I think every one of those guys are dangerous. Every one of them has either won the title or been in title contention. I'm saying to go through that or run through those guys and be in the UFC undefeated, overall record 23-1 or whatever it is. I'm saying that's a big feat, and be the title holder, and you beat the last two title holders.
And I don't know if you guys just seen Chad Mendez at Bare Knuckle. He's a fucking
Yeah, and
legend.
yeah, listen, he got his supplements back. We need supplements back in the UFC. That's all I'm gonna
No,
say.
that's eczema medication. That's topical eczema medication. It just so happens to make you look extremely muscular for a 5 foot tall man. That's all.
Hey,
That's
give him
all.
the supplements. But the question you alluded to in the beginning, that I think as to where you were going, Holiday, um, do I think that he beat them in their prime? Aldo wasn't in his prime. Chad Mendez wasn't in his prime. Holloway, yes. Ortega, yes. But it's another one of those things where if you come into a division and you stay and you wait for people to get old, I knock you for it. If you come into the division and beat everybody in the top of the division, they just happen to have gotten old during that time, I don't knock you for it. That's the John Bones Jones argument. So, oh, well, everybody was old. Yeah, he destroyed all these guys. They got older when he came. It's not like he waited and ducked people. He had like a couple fights in the UFC and then fought for the title. And then every single person that came up as that number one contender status, he knocked down to the point they start bringing people in. You had people, you know, coming from other weight classes to come and try to, fight. So I think that if you come to a division and you beat everybody that's there and you win that title and you defend that title and you're beating number one contenders and some of them happen to be old, but they're still at the top of the heap, I don't knock you for that at all.
Got you. I'm with you. I line up what you're saying. It's I don't know. When I look at his fights, or whatever. And I didn't do like a go because I mean my objective wasn't come here to talk about him at all, actually. um, so I didn't like go back and through and watch his fights. Obviously, as we know from the last one, I believe that he lost both to Max Holloway. But I understand TJ's point. Even though I should say his full government name, but I understand TJ's point when he's saying, okay, well, basically, it's your job to finish it, especially if you feel like you got robbed the first time. So I think that's a fair point, even though I clearly think that he lost both of those fights. Um, and Ortega, I think is good, but to your point earlier, I don't really look at him as like, you know how like when champions go on a run, I give a better example. Everybody on here know I did not like Usman. I mean, technically, I still don't like him, but it's not undeniable or whatever. And I literally didn't think that he had a chance against Woodley, honestly. I thought Woodley was going to beat him up pretty bad. I was really upset after that fight. And it had nothing to do with Usman. In my head, it was all Woodley just laid there. I mean, obviously we did see where Woodley went from there, but he did that, and then after that, it's like okay, boom, he come back, and then it was like everybody else. He was like really, and I'm like, okay, he really is kind of putting in that work, and he's really, I'm hitting the table. My bad. He's really beating people decisively. I literally thought he was going to have that title with Woodley, and then probably lose it. You know what I mean? I didn't think that he was going to be as good as he was. And I was more so surprised, and I think so. Whereas when I see Volk, even though he's winning, it's not that I don't think he's good. Once again, we're all talking right now, top of the top type stuff. But he don't jump off the screen to me like that. It's a lot. I shouldn't say a lot because I know you got more kind of backpack on you for this one. But it's like how you used to always talk about Henry Morale, and you would be like, "Yeah, I mean he beating everybody, but I mean he don't really like he that good to me." I'm not quoting you accurately, but to kind of get the point, you can kind of clean up if you want to. That's kind of how I feel about Volk when I watch his fights. Because it's like Ortega to me is it's not like it's like a good win. It's a good win. You know, I mean he beat my boy, but everybody's been beating him lately as well. The wins just don't seem as that. But when you do turn it around, Max Holloway was having great wins, and then his two losses, which were wins, was there. But to the point, you destroying people to have this fight close enough that it's even up in the air must show some type of something, I guess, skill set.
Yeah, let me comment on your Henry Morale and what I think is so different between him and Volkanovski. Henry, my argument was he was being crowned based on what he did outside of the UFC, in my opinion. And when I looked at him skill for skill, the amount of flaws that I saw compared to what I felt like was in that division that he just hadn't faced yet told me that he's not going to be champion. He just hasn't got exposed yet, which is exactly what happened, right? Volkanovski is fighting the top of the heap. He beat the last two champions. That wasn't the case with Renan Barao. It's not like he was running through champions or maybe having a close fight or whatever. He wasn't. That division was in a bit of a disarray at the time, and it's not like he was running through. Cruz was out. There were so many people that wasn't there that he didn't fight and take the crown.
Cruz is
So
always out.
so he didn't fight and take the crown and then all of a sudden start beating these legends, or there was nobody as dangerous as Brian Ortega there that he beat. Brian Ortega is absolutely dangerous. He's lost to two men, the current champion and the champion before that, right? And I think he would have beat Volkanovski had Max not broken him. I think we talked about this in the fight group. That was one of those fights where that was kind of like a Junior Dos Santos, Cain Velasquez fight where I think Brian Ortega left something in that ring of that Max fight having too much heart. You know what I mean? So I just want to I'm just saying that to say the difference between the two. I think Max, I think Volkanovski is legit. I still think he lost both of those Max fights. But once again, you can't fight a man once, lose a decision, and then fight him. Neither one had a gap in between. They fought each other the very next fight. And then you and Max don't come and bring it and show something different to make a definitive statement. It's your own fault at that point in time if you lose. And that's the reason why I can't really knock Volkanovski for that. Although I think Max is the better fighter if we're talking about looking at him on paper, them fighting 10 times the whole nine. But when we look at what Volkanovski has done in the division, his record, all of that. And then once again, we're talking about pound for pound, and he's fighting a bigger man. I have to give him the edge on that.
Well, I think it's obvious we're all a little biased because we're Max fans, so there is that. But I think Holladay's anti-Volk super bias showed when he said he didn't even look at his little fights or whatever. Like, okay, we get it, but come on, man.
You know them little fights, man. You know them little.
Like, if this was a court of law, like, your whole shit would have just got thrown out. Like, okay, you know what? Strike that off from the record.
So, but look, though, like, one of the more interesting aspects of, and I think everybody's touching on this when you think about it, right? Like, DC made the most prominent point. Y'all fought back. You fought back to back 2 times, and you didn't change what you brought to the cage. Neither one of them did, right? But it's like, if I'm Max Holloway and I felt like I got robbed, I'm going to come out there and definitively put an end to this fight. While I may think he did enough to do that, I still feel like he only lost those decisions based off of his last couple of fights leading up to those Volkanovski fights, right? I felt like everybody walked into that Volkanovski fight thinking, Max is about to embarrass this man again. So Volk did just enough to stay in there and make it to the decision that the judges, in my opinion, was like, well, he survived, so therefore he won. Like, that's the way I feel about those fights. The funny thing, DC called out in terms of Ortega being broken. I don't necessarily know if he was broken fundamentally, like to a Dos Santos level. I do think he has, it's going to sound silly, but I think he has PTSD, right? And I think the minute it started to feel like he was getting brutalized again, he started going back into that dark place and he couldn't figure out how to get out of it. And then by the time it was over, by the time he kind of got to started realizing that the fight was over, you know what I'm saying? I feel like I need to see Ortega in two more really solid fights. Let's say he takes on Calvin Kattar next, right? Two people that have been victimized by Holloway. Let's see where he comes out on that scenario before I call him broken. But yeah, that's my take on Volk. And to Locke's point, Jesus Christ, to Locke's point, they were little fights because he's not special. So yeah.
Let me say this. This is what T City should have did. And I'm going to say this for Locke because this is what Locke says every podcast. He should have went to EBI. He shouldn't fight for 2 years. He should just go grapple for a while. As a matter of fact, what's today? This weekend? Yeah, this weekend there's an EBI event on Sunday. By the way, Locke, I sent you something. There's a big wrestling event going down in Detroit, I think Saturday or something like that. And I didn't know if you were going to watch it or not, but especially if Carson's going to watch it, that might be a good one to have a cast on. But I just wanted to throw that in there. Locke was going to tell him to go to Eddie Bravo and go grapple.
If it's not like WWE back when Stone Cold was wrestling.
You cut
You
out
got
whatever your
mute.
last words were. You muted yourself because you knew it wasn't right.
I basically said don't nobody care about wrestling. If it ain't Stone Cold and The Rock and the heyday, don't nobody care.
Okay, so if nobody has anything to throw out, I have this one for Locke. So Locke, I'm gonna need Locke to put some respect on my boy DJ's name. So I forgot to give him the rebuttal when he basically disrespected DJ on so many levels, said he shouldn't be pound for pound, and he said he shouldn't be on the list because he the same as John Bones Jones. He ain't fought. And it was just so disrespectful. And so I got 600 points.
So I knew this was coming. I have my DJ page up ready to go because I knew this was gonna come.
Yeah. I'm rubbing my hands together like
It
Mr.
was as
Miyagi.
predictable as I knew that you had one fighters on your pound for pound list. You're a very simple guy, man. You're not complicated.
Hey, I try to do what I can for everybody. But let me say this. First of all, I mentioned several times that he was fighting a much bigger man. I don't think I got that point across by saying it. Let me explain. In the UFC, he originally fought at 135 because there was no 125. 125 was made for him because he's such a small man. He's 5'3". And he was having problems with these bigger guys. When he went over to he went back to 135. The names are the same, but the weight classes are not. If everybody remembers, just like over in Japan, they'll have similar names, but the weight won't be the same. So everything that's in the UFC right now, add 10 pounds to it, and that is the equivalent over in one. Okay? So, saying that to say, he's fighting at 135. Now, to get a picture of how large Adriano is, if you look at pretty much everybody in the current bantamweight division in the UFC, he's bigger than everybody except for Sanhagen. Right? He's bigger than everybody except for Sanhagen. So, when you factor that in, once again, for the size of looking at, you know, what he was going up against, that's a huge factor. Okay. Now, as far as him not fighting, we got to remember there was an event that happened in 2020. We had people getting sick from drinking Heinekens. We had the Heineken sickness go on in 2020. Okay, exactly. As Holaday sipping on a Heineken. So we had the Heineken sickness go on in 2020. He was scheduled to fight. He had won. So when he went over to one, he won 3 fights in a row and became their tournament champion. Okay. He had the belt. But now they have a tournament champion and a regular champion. And the tournament champion now gets to fight for whoever has that belt. Hence, they made the fight. The fight was made for April 2020. They canceled the events. Now, they end up picking back up events later. But what happened was there was still a travel ban, especially all throughout Asia. He couldn't get over there to fight. So they postponed the fight for both men, and both men sat and waited, and neither fought in 2020 because they were waiting for the matchup. Not the same at all as JBJ, because as we know, the UFC continued to fight. They missed what, 1, 2 events at the most, and they was like, Dana White was like, "No, we going to Fight Island. We fighting." JBJ chose not to fight. That's very different. DJ has never retired, and he has continued to fight every fight that they put in front of him, including being scheduled, I think next month, he's scheduled for a kickboxing or Muay Thai fight. Okay. Um, Also, if we go back to the record, since Locke says he has the record pulled up, we're going to put some respect on this name, right? So as we know, you have to go back to the Cruz fight initially for him to actually lose a fight. And then he loses a split decision to Henry Cejudo, which was his last fight in the UFC. We've talked about that. We
Which he
talked about it
won.
on the last one. Yeah, I think so, but we'll just go
He
for
won
what's on
with
paper.
2 blown knees and a broken foot, right? He
We'll
won
just
that
go
on.
for what's on paper, though. So he lost that one. He came back and won 3 more fights in a row at a bigger weight class, higher weight class at 135. And then he fought the champion, and that was a clear loss, a KO. Nothing else to be said about that one, right? That was a clear loss. But once again, when I look at that resume, and then I also compare him to both the UFC's 135 and 125 division, are you really saying it's that many people that are better than him where he can't fit in your top 10 list of UFC fighters? I mean, can we really say pound for pound Volkanovski's better than DJ? No. Heck no. Stop it.
Well, we know you
Stop
can't say that.
it. But to my point, I'm saying that, and not for the list itself, but it's more the argument. Even if you have Volkanovski ahead, it's more the argument of saying he literally can't fit on your top 10 with that type of resume. So now,
Can
with
you?
everything that go ahead.
Sorry,
Yep, go ahead.
not that I'm going to make this argument, but could there be an argument made that he's not? He left the organization and started fighting lower tier talent or opposition. So did he leave the organization to go to a smaller league where he was now the big dog and it was easier for him to get these wins? Did he run away from competition? I feel like those are the sort of things that people kind of bring up when they say whether or not he's fallen off of that GOAT list, that current GOAT. I think he's still all time.
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder if those are elements that we should weigh in as we start talking about him.
If they were true, I would say let's weigh them in, but you got to remember what happened. The UFC felt like they couldn't market him. They traded him. If you remember, they traded him for Ben Askren.
Trash.
It's not like he said, "Hey, I want to go and I want to leave and I need to fight somebody else." He was always ready, willing, and able to fight whoever, multiple times, whatever, right? It became the thing where they wanted to trade him because they wasn't even sure if they were going to keep 125 because they didn't know how to market him. So I think that's a very different situation than me.
I thought the narrative was that he was essentially requesting to go there or be released, and they instead of releasing him, they got Ben Askren.
Not that I'm aware of. I know that they were having some general disputes, but once again, it went back to being marketed. The whole argument was about him being marketed and getting that big look. And of course, as we've talked about before, and I forget which podcast we talked about it on, but his coach and mentor was over at One, so that would be an easy transition. And One had they got a lot of guys his size. He wasn't going to have an issue getting a fight at 125 or 135. It wasn't one of those things where, okay, this 125, if you decide to fight there, is not going to exist anymore, right? A lot of that was taken off of the table. So I don't think that's number one. And number two, I don't think that One is weaker competition, particularly when we talk about the smaller guys. I don't think UFC has ever had the best small guys. In my book, most of the other promotions that I've seen, especially a lot of the Asian promotions, when you get to that 125, 135, and it's not because I don't think the UFC is good in that category. I think they're great. I think it's that other places were incubating those guys for longer. Whereas if we remember for a long time, 155 and at one point in time 170 was the lowest you can go in the UFC. As we know, that's how your Aldos and your Cruzes and those guys kind of came over as champions because they bought another division. They bought WEC and they kind of split it. They left all the higher weight deep classes in the UFC, all the lower weight classes in the WEC. And then finally they had a merge over and then they start taking guys from other areas. But in the Asian countries, they've always had spectacular small guys. So I don't know, unless we see a clash, I don't know that he went to a weaker place to fight.
especially if you add in steroids. But I definitely want to hear
Facts.
Locke's rebuttal to you because y'all kind of went and it was silent. But all I was gonna say was the reason
He
why
doesn't have a
the reason why the UFC didn't have the greater smaller guys yet because they was waiting for Uriah Faber to come and make all of them. So Uriah Faber came. He's like, we're gonna get all the small guys. We're gonna put them in one gym, and then we're gonna farm the UFC out. But I want to let Locke go ahead and jump in here. I don't want to let her get what
But
I'm saying.
before a lot go, that is actually true. Everybody needs to put some respect on Faber's name. He single-handedly kept the little guys fighting in the Americas because they would be all but gone if it wasn't for Uriah Faber. Put some respect
Yo,
on
I
his name.
I actually, not that this is the conversation we're having. I do think if we were to ever have a breakdown of the most disrespected sort of legends in the UFC or in MMA, I think Uriah Faber is like right in that top 10. Like, you almost never hear about him and just in any conversation. I think people forget, I don't know if it's the Aldo fight or his UFC run, just how high end he was at when he was, making waves, right?
WEC days.
So that's a lot. I got to reprocess all of this to try and go back. So the first thing when I made the comparison to John Jones, I didn't mean that they were choosing the same motives for inactivity. So I understand the situation and he's fighting where there's a travel ban. I get all that. I didn't mean it like, oh yeah, because I mean, John Jones is always on some bullshit. That's not DJ's case. So I didn't mean it from the aspect of they're doing it for the same reasons. I just meant when you look at sheer volume of fights. And I do think, and I know it's unpopular, and I know you're real high on One, that I think it was a step back in competition. I feel like it is. There's no way we can go about it because you're going to say it's not. I'm going to say it is. I will say, looking at their rankings, he did fight the top guys they have over there. And we always say you can only fight the guys that are in front of you. And he's beating them. And looking at it, the guys he's fought over there are their top guys. But I just think that when we're looking at right now, the pound for pounds, now if we're talking about like an all-time, I'm a big DJ guy. I'm a big fan of his run. I think he won the Cejudo fight. And I do think it was kind of bullshit, the trade over to One. But I think all parties kind of won. You know what I mean? The the UFC flyweight division, got to do some new shit with like Moreno and stuff like that.
Triple C,
DJ,
put some respect on his name.
what's that?
Triple C, the king
Yeah.
of cringe, put some respect on his name.
I think DJ's doing just fine, and he's fighting somewhere where they appreciate small fighters, so it did well for him. So, but I just think when you look at the activity, so he didn't fight, all through 20. The last fight he had, he got knocked out. I get that he's a bigger dude, but I mean, that's what you're doing. I know I said when Israel went up and lost to Jan that I don't want to take people taking chances and moving up in divisions against them, but that wasn't him jumping up a division for a fight. That's in his division. That's the division he's fighting in over there that he lost at, So it is
Good
what
point.
it is. If they're
Good
too
point.
big, cut the weight. I don't know what to tell you. That's the division you're choosing to fight in. And the other thing is, sometimes I just be saying shit. You know what I mean? I'm not like a guy that puts a lot of thought into stuff before I just be blurting shit out.
I love that. Listen, you can just end it right there. Let's end the whole podcast. I love that one. Oh man, just so the audience know, everybody's dying laughing, everybody else is just muted, but that's hilarious.
Yeah, that's funny. I could definitely dig it. I think I think that him being traded to one is definitely some BS. I think that he suffered from being too good for his own good because they said they couldn't market him, or what they used to always say was that he don't sell fights, basically, right? There was no excitement around him, and I think they kind of proved that because you see more excitement without him there. But I think it was just the fact that he was so good. So, for example, besides the fight that he lost, there wasn't no fights that we arguing about with Moreno and Figueredo about what they really won, but they really lost. It was like he was just literally just beating the whatever out of people. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes you could be too good for your own good. We used to have an argument with about DJ all the time, like the Roy Jones argument. It's like, y'all said I fought a bunch of nobodies. That's because I made them nobodies. Y'all must have forgot type of a deal. And, one of the arguments in the group used to be basically he ain't beat no champions. And it's like, but they would be champions if he didn't exist. You know what I mean? Like the only reason why they're not champions is because he's better than them and he is the champion, right? But if they was there and he didn't exist and they would be champion, he would come in and he would beat them. And I think that was the problem, the reason why they couldn't, because we know that especially in America, we like everything fat and out of shape, right? So there's no respect there's no respect for the small guy in combat sports, where the reality is I actually enjoy watching the smaller weight classes the most. Yeah, you get your bigger like knockouts and stuff like that in heavyweights, but usually I'm bored until the knockout, or I'm offended at their bellies while they fighting. You know what I mean? Whereas with the smaller guys, it's usually a lot of action for one. It's usually more of a chess match, and then there's usually actual skill sets that you see put on display. Where you watch a heavyweight fight, and they may just lay on each other until the fourth round, and somebody throw one big haymaker, then the other person did. It's like, oh, that was a great fight, but it wasn't a great fight. That was a nice knockout. And so you put all that together, I think the DA just got grossly disrespected. Now, once he went to one, he was completely off my radar. I've literally never seen a one fight ever. Like no
Because
fight.
you are American and y'all, that's
Yes,
what y'all do. Y'all don't like nobody but America.
that's right. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, exactly. Because if he didn't went to Bellator, I would at least seen one fight.
Hey,
When Henderson went over there, I said watch one fight, everybody, but you can't get two though.
so I wanted to say this on DJ, to Holiday's point. I kind of agree when he says, he could be too good for his own good. And I think, if we look at now, is this the best DJ we've ever seen? I mean, I think probably 2017 DJ is probably like his prime version. So, but I do think he's a fighter that has always been so head and shoulders above the division. And I think there's a possibility that he's just a bored fighter. So he's a bored fighter that's found legitimate alternatives to make very good money. And I think at some point that can get a little bit dangerous when you can make good money off Twitch and your social media and shit like that. You know what I mean? And in the meantime, you're in the fight game because it's what you do, but it's starting to bore you. I mean, you know what I mean? You're taking fucking MMA hybrid rules, Muay Thai fights and shit. So
That I'm
to
not
me,
happy with.
that
I
reeks
get
of a bored fighter, and I think that's a dangerous thing.
I got two things to call out here. So like that narrative that he didn't sell fights, right? Like every
You
time
better
people
not
tell
say
me,
what I'm gonna say, TJ, because last time you took so
well,
much of
just
what I was
say
gonna
it,
say. No, because
because
I'm gonna let you go next. Go ahead.
I'm pretty sure it's not what you're gonna say, but you made me lose my train of thought. So I'll just do it this way. Whenever people tell me he doesn't sell fights, I always ask the question, well, who does? And you get the same answers, back at one point, Conor, GSP, Conor, GSP, Conor, GSP, John Jones, a little bit Conor. So it's like, so if you're telling me that he didn't deserve to be in the UFC because he didn't sell fights, but only 3 people ever sell fights, then it's like, it doesn't make sense, right? And at that time when he was making his biggest wave, that's when UFC was getting into primetime television. It's like the guy was tailor made for primetime television. Clean cut, well spoken, friendly, sort of a nerd, can do a Burger King commercial and sell an Xbox. Like he was designed to headline every Fox or NBC card ever made, right? And then the other element to it is, like as Holaday touched on, he beat the top of his division. When he was beating them, he beat them soundly, and they then became nobodies. But every single fight up until he left the UFC, there was always a viral or memeable moment. Like everybody remembers the suplex into the arm bar, or like him basically kneeing Henry Cejudo on the stomach and Henry just collapsing into itself, right? His sort of non-marketability felt 100% personal and petty on the UFC's part, and they're just not willing to have him be the face of their company. Like any major company can sell anybody to be their star. Like you don't always have to be the best. They just didn't want to get into business with him.
Yeah, no, you didn't say what I was gonna say, so that leaves it for me. But no, I agree with you 100%. I mentioned before that I think DJ is very, very marketable, and I just think the UFC chose not to do it. But not only that, and this was my only thing about what you said, Holiday, when you said, well, he's gone now and look at the division. I'm going to tell you the difference. When he was there, he was the start of 125. It just started. It takes a while to develop a division. I don't care what division it is, it takes a while. And they absolutely did not go out and get a slew of talent for 125. So in turn, what you end up seeing was DJ fighting Ian McCall twice, Benavidez twice, John Dotson twice, fighting Henry Cejudo twice. Like you go down the list, and what ended up happening was because they would not go out, get and groom new talent, he kept fighting the same dudes over and over again. And although the second time he usually beats them more spectacular, how many times can you be awed at somebody doing the exact same trick, right? Or like, let's take it to another sport. Let's say basketball. Every game is the fucking Lakers versus the Celtics. Now you know I don't watch basketball right now, so I don't know what each one of them doing. But let's say every game, every night is the Lakers versus the Celtics. At some point, it's like, I mean, I know there's good guys out here, and one guy on this team may be the best in the world, but I don't want to keep seeing this. What else is there? The difference is when he left, they decided to bring more talent into the division and start grooming more people for the division. That makes a huge difference. It's different when you can go on a big run and have a different look at a different guy. Now, where I will agree with you at is I think he was so good, he was running through guys, and that gave a chance for him to fight guys more than once. But I don't think any champion in UFC history has fought more fighters on their title run more than once than he did in the span of which he was a champion. And that to me is a knock on the UFC for not going out and bringing the talent in. And once again, you can't say that they're not there because there's a million people over in Asia And I'm talking about the continent, right? Look at what one is doing. They're not just going after China or Singapore, whatever. They're grabbing everybody, Thailand, you name it. And we know that there's a slew of guys over there that can make 125 and 135. And the UFC just didn't choose to go and really get those individuals and bring them in and start grooming people and have them fight before they have a name where they have a chance to build a resume to fight a DJ. That just didn't happen. So, but also, to the point of like what you said with the Twitch thing and piggybacking on what you said, TJ, about him just being marketable, I think nerd culture has grown a lot. Video game culture has grown a lot. For you to have a guy that's well spoken in those cultures, a personable guy, and then he gives you spectacular wins and you can't market him, you just got to say you suck at marketing or you don't like him. Those are the only two explanations for that.
Or can I add a third one? He should have
Sure,
went
why
and got
not?
the Detroit survival guy, and then he would have been marketable.
He wasn't out back then, man. He wasn't out, you know what I'm saying? But Detroit stand up. We did good last UFC.
Yeah, no, I understand everything that you're saying. I know that it's clear, but just to be clear for the audience, even though I don't read comments anyway, so people won't be trolling me. I'm not saying that he wasn't marketable, even with my
Too
statement of
late.
saying that, you know, I said they couldn't market him, and I said they proved it by once they got rid of him, the division got better. But to your point, if you make these different concessions, it is. But they hated him. I mean, he said that he never got any of his belts, so everybody else get a belt every time they
Yeah,
won, and he didn't even know that because
yeah,
they never gave him his belt. So they let him know from the front, we hate you.
yeah, exactly. And for those reasons, I can't have that as a knock against you.
And that's ridiculous because is there a less hateable fighter than DJ? It makes no sense.
Exactly. Like some
It's
people
a
are just like super cool where you're just like, man, why would you have an issue with this person?
Like Chael Sonnen.
stop it. Wasn't the issue though Dana White didn't like DJ's manager? What's his name? The guy. I guess he's running that one FC right now, right?
Yeah, shoot, what is his name? Um
Terrible. We're all
I'll
casual
I'll
MMA
think of it
fans.
right.
That's what it
No,
is.
this what's funny is I've used his name multiple times on the podcast, but you know how you get called on the spot on something? It's like, wait a minute,
Yep.
what is his name? It's on the
I
tip of
thought,
my
but
tongue too.
as I sit in my noisy ass chair. Yeah, it's. I thought that was the big story, right? Like Dana White just didn't like that guy and that manager or whatever. So that's kind of DC got the fall out of that. I mean, DC, DJ got the fall out of that.
Yeah, no, I don't remember that, but it's one of those things. I think it's definitely plausible. We know that Dana White definitely, he's probably like if there was a petty awards, he would be by far like he would be on like a 12, 15 year streak of the title of the petty awards. I don't think there's
He'd be the
anybody
Demetrius Johnson of the petty
of
awards.
exactly. I don't think anybody is more petty than him.
Right when
So
you
it
think you're
would put
about
it
to win the
past you.
petty award, Dana White come through with some some
Does that
memeable
make
petty, like
does that
a highlight fucking petty moment.
does that make Jake Paul his Henry Cejudo since Jake Paul beat him?
Jake Paul is definitely a part of his kryptonite. I think he wakes up at night, in the middle of the night, in a cold sweat, trying to figure out how to beat Jake Paul, and that is hilarious.
Yeah, I would say this about Dana. Dana should definitely teach classes because I don't know if I ever said this on this podcast or not before, but I think that Conor McGregor is like the greatest loser ever, and not in the sense of being a great loser, but he's the person who talks so much stuff you want to see lose, so that you can rub it in their face. But somehow, whenever he loses, the way he responds, it don't take away from all his cockiness, the way he do stuff. And it's never a way that you just want to just rub it in his face. Besides the very last one, when that was like more off character to the way he usually loses. I think Dana White has that level of responding. Every time he do something that is 1,000% BS, he always has a response Just like, come on, guys. I mean, it's not BS. And it's like the way he responds, it sounds so plausible. He seems so convinced. Like, you know how a person lies so much they really be lying to themselves? You like, remember that time? Like, bro, I wasn't there. I know for a fact I wasn't there because I was at my grandma's funeral on this day. Like, no, you was there. He convinced you was there. That's Dana White.
Yeah, I think uh people like that, that's when you some people are really like they just have that from a young age. It's not because they're successful or whatever else. That's really who they are. And then you have people that are completely fake like Kobe Covington, and it comes off as fake and it comes off as weird, right? But if you go back and look at like old Conor McGregor stuff way before the UFC and everything like that. He was always super cocky. If you go back and look at early Dana when he had, he was trying to keep his hair, Dana was always an asshole. You know what I mean? So I think certain people like that, that's just you. And then once you get to the top of the heap and you have money, it just magnifies it. And by the way, TJ, Matt Hume is DJ's guy. Did anybody else have any other rebuttals or anything else from that last pound for pound before we get ready to wrap this up?
I
Well, I
do.
definitely. Oh, go ahead.
Um, so as I was talking about the ridiculousness of having Colby Covington on the pound for pound list when he ain't beat like a top fighter since RDA is what I said in 2018, and I forget who it was what said it's because they're not top fighters because he cleaned out the division and smashed them. So I checked and I found like in MMA stats it has the old rankings, and when he beat Robbie Lawler and Woodley, they were ranked 11 and 7, and they were both coming off back-to-back losses. So
That
those were not.
website is
So
completely wrong. They were 1 and 2.
he hasn't beat a top 5 fighter since 2018, and we got him on the pound for pound list.
Absolutely.
Like I get that you're a Colby Covington fan, and that's awesome, and I appreciate that. But at some point, we gotta be something realistic. Like he hasn't beat a top fighter in forever.
Well, let me say this. Your statement wasn't what I said as far as he cleared out the division. So I didn't say that. But I did say what I did say was what I did say though was, I mean, he was still fighting. It's not like he was fighting 15 and below to get to the championship, right? He was still fighting top guys, and then he fought the number one guy, the guy with the belt, twice. That has to go for some. So if you're not fighting the number one guy, then yeah, you're fighting somebody else in that heap to get you back to that title contention. But what was mentioned, and I'll just point out again, what was mentioned on that was um, during that time, you had a lot of guys holding out, right? Or different things that would happen. So, like Leon Edwards was mentioned. I don't even remember what all happened with Leon Edwards because it was so much stuff. And he kept being called the unluckiest man ever because every time it was time for him to get a title shot, something happened. Somebody gets hurt. He gets hurt, or he's waiting for the belt, but then somebody else is fighting for it. So a lot of those guys that
Wasn't
would
it
be there to fight,
wasn't it the Modelo situation or Heineken situation as well?
yeah, I
Because
think that was, yeah,
that's how Kobe ended up fighting Woodley, is because it was supposed to be Leon,
yep.
and then first Woodley couldn't go over there, then Leon couldn't go over here, then Kobe stepped in there. I'm gonna let you keep going, DZ, but to Locke's point, like you can't really in good faith say Kobe hasn't beaten anyone high level or top 5 in even 5 years, because he was consensus number 2 and the only person above him was the champion probably for the last 4.5 years. And so everybody he's fought, he did them a favor by letting them fight, like by fighting them. You know what I'm saying? And the only person he's lost to is Woodley.
Yeah, I think
I mean, not
that,
Woodley, but Usman. So yeah.
yeah, and I think that it's a when you're fighting dangerous guys, even if they're not ranked in the top 5, it means something. Especially guys that are on the swing up or on the tick up. So, like for example, there's no credit there for fighting Dos Anjos, but Dos Anjos went to 170, and if you remember, all of a sudden he looked like a world beater again, and people were talking about him fighting for the title, right? And then Kobe derailed his train and was the person that beat him after him going on that 3-fight win streak. So I think there's a lot that happens there as you're coming to the point of making a name. And most people, unless you're like a Michael Johnson, or you got some guys that they're gonna give every single person in the top 10. They got to fight in order to get to a title. That's not most fighters. Most fighters aren't fighting everybody in the top 10 to get to a title, right? If we go back, like I'll use John Bones Jones, he's a great example to use. How many people did he really beat in the top 10 before he got a chance to fight Shogun for that title? It was off of the Ryan Bader win. Both new guys pretty much in the UFC. The two guys that they were both undefeated, it was like, okay, one of these guys are going to be the next guy. Let's put them against each other. It wasn't like he had to fight Lyoto Machida and Dan Henderson and all these other guys first, and then finally you get to Shogun, right? But now if you get to fight the guy with the title again, over again, you are fighting a top 10, a top 5 opponent. So he's fought a top 5 opponent twice in his last 5 fights. You can't really knock that. And it's not like, once again, let me just say this one last thing. I'd like to dive in. And then the other guy that he fought in that time was the former title holder that the new champ took it from. You can't knock him for that.
I didn't say he didn't fight anybody in the top 5. I said he didn't beat anybody in the top 5. That's what I said. He hasn't beat a top 5 opponent since RDA. And
how many top 5 opponents did he fight in that time?
2, or just Usman is the only one.
And he's lost to one person, so that's
right.
really
and
I
one
get
time,
it, but
one
that's
time
like
he got
a
his jaw
hard
broke.
knock.
One time he got his jaw broke, and then the other time he got roughed up pretty good, got a little scrappy at the end, and we count that like it's a good fight. Like, no. I'm not saying, listen, I'm not saying that Colby Covington is an elite fighter, and I'm not saying he doesn't belong towards the top of the welterweight rankings. I'm just saying there's too much talent on the rest of the roster to slide him over from the welterweight rankings to the pound for pound rankings when he hasn't beat a top guy in years. And now if he beats George Masvidal, he still will not have beat a guy that was ranked in the top 5 coming off back-to-back losses since 2018. What the fuck are we doing, man? Let's make his career great again and put him against a real fighter.
Yeah, this the thing. This is why I'm rolling with Locke at a couple different things. I think what's funny is I'm still rolling where he gonna lose to Street Jesus, but I think what makes it when you're talking the pound for pound and all that, and not just specifically records. When you look at his fights, right? To your point, you count the Usman fights because if Usman is number 1, and the last fight they go to a decision, quote unquote, it was close at times, right? But then you look at like the Willie fight, he was winning, obviously, but Willie rib popped out of place. That's how it ended. He lost to Usman before that. He beat Robbie Lawler in a decision, unanimous. Dos Anjos decision, unanimous. Damian Maia decision, unanimous. So forth and so on. You keep going. I think a lot of times a win is a win, but I think when you think about stuff, you think about these dominant wins. And going back to my point with Max Holloway, and I don't know why I keep forgetting this dude's name, but TJ, just say his name because you know his name. But when he beat the brakes off of old dude, if you remember in the last podcast, my point,
Calvin Cater.
Yeah, my point was when you fight somebody down in competition, you show it, right? And the thing about the Kobe joints is everything is basically going to a decision or he loses. That's, you know what I mean? And
I mean,
he's got them Tito Ortiz pillow punches, man.
Let me say this.
He's out there punching with pillows.
He's lost to one man. Y'all making it sound like he's just going out here getting beat. He's lost to one man. That's first.
Go ahead.
Let me say this. That's first. He's lost to one man. That's number one. Number two, you have to claim the rankings. It's not like he came out the gate and he was in the top 5. He was about to get cut from the UFC. Why? Not because he wasn't winning, but because, and this goes into like what I was saying in the last podcast about Antonio Mckee, who I loved as a fighter. He's not a today's time spectacular fighter. He's an old school, put the cardio on you, get you on the ground type of fighter. Yes, you're going to see more decisions there, but this is the problem. The same people that will knock somebody else for doing that are the same people that would go and praise GSP for having decision after decision, right? Like, this guy is winning, and it's not like these are close fights. Yes, it's a decision, but they're not close fights. He's really beating guys up. That's number one.
Yeah.
And number two, going to the pound for pound, okay, let's look at the list that's out there. We're really going to say Dustin Poirier is better than him pound for pound? No, Dustin Poirier can make that weight. He'll beat the piss out of Dustin Poirier. We're really going to say pound for pound Figueiredo is better than him? No, absolutely not. We're going to say pound for pound AJ McKee's better than him? No. We're going to say, like, we can go down a list if we're talking about a pound. And I'm just looking at Shirt Dog's list. We can take anybody's list on here. And what I'm saying
I
is,
wouldn't even go pound for pound. Go to the UFC current welterweight
no, but
ranking and walk
I'm
down
leaving it
that
at
list.
that because that's what we were talking about. But if we go, because I mentioned what you just said, TJ, I mentioned that on the last one. I'm like, well, who's really going to beat him there? But if we're talking about pound for pound, and we're talking about him being on the list or not being on the list, who of those guys, you're telling me every one of those guys I named, if they were 170 and the same size as Kobe, they beat Kobe?
I think Figueredo
Either one
beats
of y'all
Kobe.
can answer.
I
Okay,
just
so we know
answered
you're
you.
not serious. Okay, so we know you're not serious. So, Locke, what do you
I
have to
do.
say?
No. I want to respond to that because
Okay,
I
go
do
ahead.
think that Figueredo will beat Kobe. We know that Kobe's going to come and he's going to basically try to wrestle him down and beat him up, right? If I'm taking Figueredo's actual skill set and I'm bringing him up to his size, or vice versa, whichever one, I'm making them the same size, but theoretically I'm keeping the same skill set, speed, movement, and everything like that. I believe that Kobe doesn't punch hard enough. I think that Figueredo showed that he can take a punch. I think that he can give a punch. He can give him in concession, and I think that he would move around enough to put a win over Kobe. And I honestly believe that.
So
I
what
don't
high
think he has the
caliber
fight IQ to
wrestler?
beat Kobe.
I don't either. But what high caliber wrestler have you seen Figueiredo beat?
I don't know. None.
Okay, so that's null and void because that's a big part of his game. So unless you saw him go up against somebody in his weight class, like maybe a Henry Cejudo or somebody like that, and you saw him won, how can you really say that when you're talking about him going up against a very high level wrestler with insane cardio? Because
No,
we're talking
Kobe's
about
done.
styles at this point. Hello, Locke, hold on. We ain't throwing lifelines now. I want him to answer this question.
Well, the reason why is because I believe just like Izzy, not in the fight that he lost when he stayed down, but Izzy did enough to not stay down in his last fight, right, against Whitaker. I wanted to try to bring him down and whatever else. I don't think you have to be a great wrestler to be able to keep yourself from being sit down. And I think that he could put enough damage on Kobe to get Kobe out of there versus Kobe just holding him down. Yes, I don't have the necessary proof because it's like to your point, I can't say, well, he fought Cejudo and look what he did to Cejudo, but he didn't fight Cejudo.
Yeah, but the difference is with Izzy, we can name wrestlers that he fought and couldn't do that. That's why I asked you
What you
first.
mean? What you mean he couldn't do that?
We can name wrestlers and grapplers that he fought that couldn't take him down or keep him down in his weight class.
You talking about Kobe?
No, I'm talking about Izzy because he named
Oh
Izzy
yeah.
and he used that example. But I'm saying we can look at that. So now we can compare how he would do against a grappler. If you haven't seen Figueiredo go up against a high level grappler, you don't know how he's going to do. So it's hard to even
I would
say that.
almost argue Figueiredo's biggest issue with the Brandon Moreno fight was the fact that Brandon could grapple, and in the first fight, it forced Figgy to stick to a straight up striking contest because every time you got close, Brandon would initiate the grapple. In the second fight, Brandon exhausted him with the grapple. Like he, yes, it was a bad wake up, but he exhausted him with the grapple. In the third fight, Figgy basically every punch that Brandon landed, Figgy like literally shied and ran away from him. And every grappling exchange, his whole focus was like, get away from him as quick as possible because I don't want to get choked out. I think when you weigh those in, and if you were to put his skill set to somebody like Kobe chokes him out within the first 2 rounds. I also think that like when we talk about Kobe not beating anybody in the top 5 of the current welterweight rankings, you gotta look at the top 5 of the current welterweight rankings didn't even exist. Like they weren't even in the top 5. I don't even know if they were in the top 10 when he first fought Usman, right? And the hardest fights Usman has had through his entire career, other than the time he tapped when he was like 1 fight in, has been Kobe. Like Kobe's the only person that's potentially, arguably, won strong rounds against him or made him fight a war. Everything else, like when people talk about Usman being a born fighter and stuff, it's because he's like literally he can impose his will in just about every position in the cage except for Kobe. Kobe, anytime he fights Kobe, it's a straight up battle. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I just think I might not be a fan of Kobe as a person. I just think it's really hard to argue he's anything but the number 1 welterweight, not champion welterweight in the world, and I think he does belong in that pound for pound list. I don't have him in my list because I don't like him, but it is what it is.
Lock, I
So
know
if
you've
you
been waiting.
did
Hold
like,
on, wait,
oh,
wait,
I'm
wait,
sorry.
wait. Because I know Lock been waiting for a minute.
Because for the record, I'm not talking about top 5 guys now. When he fought them, they weren't top 5. When he fought Robbie Lawler was 11. So that's, I'm just saying.
And what was he ranked?
I think he was 2. He was 2 and Lawler was 11. I could go check it again.
Yeah, because
But both of those,
I would say
him and Woodley, he was fighting down. So he was ranked high because RDA was ranked 1 and he beat him. And then Lawler was 11 and then Woodley was 7 at that time. But I do want to say, I definitely think. What's that?
And a former champion. Because there's a lot of things we know that go at play.
I'm just saying, at
play
that
when you're
time,
trying
they
to get
weren't
a
a top
title
5
shot.
fighter and they were coming off back-to-back losses. So they
when you're
weren't
trying
like,
to get a title shot in the UFC, there's a bit of a game that you play. And one of those things is beating a former champion. But go ahead.
No, Colby's definitely a top 5 welterweight.
You disrespecting them. You try to make. I know what you gonna have one of them hats in a minute to say "Make Russia Great Again." I know what you're trying to do over there. Go ahead, Holiday. I know you was trying to jump in before something, but I had cut Lock off and then it kept
saying
going.
that name because you're gonna get us demonetized. Stop saying that name.
I actually forgot what I was going to say.
You were gonna make a point.
Something.
You were gonna make a point about me saying that I don't have him on my list because I'm not a fan, and partially it's really because I never got through that number 6 to 10 spot, and I kind of forgot who I had listed. But I feel like he was in my probably number 10 in that list. But yeah,
I'll say this while you're thinking, Holiday. I'll say this. I don't like Kobe Covington either. I absolutely don't like him whatsoever as a person. I think he's fake. I think he's a real piece of crap in a lot of ways. But one of the things that I'm always able to do in this realm of combat sports is I separate out. TJ, can you mute for a second? I separate out, what I think about a person and their skill level, especially when I'm comparing different people. And I think, Kobe Covington, because of who he is, it makes a lot of people hate him. And I think the hate always makes you downgrade or downplay a fighter. But when we're looking at skill set, for his size, the amount of cardio he's able to put on people at that weight class and everything, his wrestling, his chain wrestling, those things, the way that he puts it together, there's very few people, in my belief, in the UFC, period, that can put up with that. And I definitely don't see, if we're just going skill for skill, when we're looking at the people that are on the pound for pound list. Once again, I named several guys that I think he would absolutely destroy. And, I don't see in any way, form, or fashion somebody saying skill for skill, if him and Portier was the same size, that Dustin Poirier would beat him. whether he's going up or Portier. I mean, whether Portier is going up or he's going down. So once again, I named several people. Take one off the list and put them on. And I'm not saying literally you have to do for that for your list, but I'm saying if we're really looking at that, that's the way that you have to look at it. Pound for pound, would this person beat him? And I say no. I think he beats a lot of those guys on the list. Put some respect on his name.
I have
Okay.
Poirier at 9.
Yeah. Anybody else got anything? Holaday, you look like you may have remembered what you were going to say.
No, I didn't remember what I was going to say at all, but I do remember at the beginning of this, Locke said he didn't get a chance to say his top 10. And I was actually kind of curious to his top 10. Just so y'all know, I didn't say my top 10 because I don't have one. I don't believe in anything past 5 in any sport. So I'll never go past 5 in a sport unless we're talking literally all time. That's a little different. But if you're talking currently, once you get past 5, it's like, what's the point? Anybody can be there. But anyway, go ahead.
Disrespectful. Go ahead, Locke. You want to run off? You got your top 10 in front of you by chance?
Yeah, I'll read them off. I won't give you the TJ dissertation. I'll just read them off real quick. I had Usman, Stylebender, Oliveira, Ngannou, Volkanovski. Those were the top 5 that I covered. Then I got Holloway at 6, Peter Yan, Gaethje, Poirier, and Stipe.
Okay, who are you and what have you done with Locke? Because I didn't see BJ Penn on that list anywhere. I don't know who you are. I need my co-host back.
That's why I don't argue about the max losses, because if we're going to start saying, well, Holloway really won those losses, then we could retract BJ's career back, and I'll flip over a couple of those decisions. It changes the whole trajectory. He's the pound-for-pound number 1 still to this day.
Well, see, this is the thing.
He definitely is. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to throw this in. I'll let you go, TJ. We kind of did that in the Fallen Goat series. I'm pretty sure we took back at least 5 of BJ Penn's losses. But anyway, go ahead, TJ.
It won't be funny now. It was a mean joke. I was going to say he can't defeat his local Hawaiian bouncer, so I don't know if we can call him pound for pound, but it would only been funny at that exact moment. Now it's just beating, punch it down. It's almost like I'm trying to beat Kobe according to Locke here.
He did lean in close on the mic for that one.
Yep.
Don't do it. Don't do it. But no, I think everybody actually made some good points in general.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah,
I think you're gonna wrap it up with just one more question.
Go ahead.
If Khabib was still an active fighter, where would he be on y'all list?
It's the problem. I've always had a love-hate relationship with Khabib in the sport of MMA. And as everybody know, in the beginning, I was like almost 0% a Khabib fan. But then he kept winning, and that made it hard not to be a fan. The problem is, going back to, there's a few things that really, really catapults me, catapults fighters in my eyes. Um, you know, who you beat is a big factor. Beating old legends is a big factor. Your streak is a big factor. And my problem with Khabib is it's like everybody wanted to make him number 1 in everything, and he didn't have a number 1 caliber resume. Um, to me that was a big factor. So where would I have him? I would probably have him somewhere between 3 and 5.
Yeah, I'd still have him behind Usman and Stylebender.
Yeah, it'd be hard because if he was still fighting, he would have to fight Usman, right?
No, they 2 different weight classes.
If he didn't duck Usman,
No,
if he didn't retire before people asked him to move up, if every time Usman's name was brought up, he just act like he couldn't speak English.
So Usman's 170, he was 55, so he would have had to fight. He pretty much fought everybody. There. Yeah, he would have had to fight Oliveira, because they Oliveira becoming the guy now. Yeah. That's who he would have had to fight.
That still brings up a good point, because if you remember on my list, I have Oliveira 3. So that would have to be good because, to your point, my problem with Khabib is not if he's good or not, because I think he has. Um, Obviously, I think he's good and he did what he did. But when you're the champion, I need to see you really defend your belt on a nice run because we know at that point you're getting everybody's best shot. So if you kind of do, so let's rewind. I'm on my lock on this one, right? So he beat Conor, which everybody on this podcast know how I feel about Conor as a fighter. I enjoy watching him fight. I feel like, and it's easy to say now because he's just been on whatever losing streak, but I feel like a lot of his fights was always just tailor made for him, right? And then I think
Hmm.
the Khabib was literally the complete opposite. That was a fight that was tailor made not for him, you know what I mean? But props to him because I don't think that he literally would back down from anyone as far as Conor fighting. Um, but you got that going into your Dustin Poirier fight. I mean, point of earlier, he fought Dustin Poirier, and I think you had brought up Michael Johnson earlier. You said he has to fight everybody. Michael Johnson almost had him, and then he just didn't. But
That is Michael John.
Let
Like that's his entire career.
I
I almost had him,
Let
and
me
then I
just didn't.
say,
didn't. Like
let me throw one thing in. I'm gonna let you finish, but I want Locke to do something because I don't know where he was looking. Can you pull up for me Khabib? And I want to know the top five that he was fighting on his way to the title.
Oh, I would have to look at it because I had to go get the dates. I couldn't do that real quick. It'd take me a
I'm
minute.
gonna
Oh,
look
I
at his
thought it was
record.
like a.
I'll look
I
at his
thought it
record
was a
real quick.
list. Well, no, I know his record. It's one of those things though, because he had something that
Yeah.
would show where they were ranked at the time. Because it's just one of those
Oh,
things. I know he wasn't fighting the
Yeah,
number
I was gonna
one,
say I
two,
could get
three
that
guy
for
on
you,
his
but it would
road.
be very few of them. He wasn't fighting a lot of top guys on his way up. I
And
mean,
that's my. That's
I mean,
even to
yeah.
win the belt, he beat Iaquinta.
Exactly. And that was my point to the whole Kobe thing. You usually don't, unless you're Michael Johnson or somebody like that, you don't get those guys until you get to the belt, in my opinion. But Holiday, I know we all cut you off, so I want you to finish. But I wanted him to look that up while you were talking, but I thought it was easy to look up.
Yeah, no, I think that your point, or the questions you asked was a good point, or the point that I was basically walking down was if he kept going on his run, then you have to adjust a lot, right? But the fact that he quote unquote quit at the top, it makes his legend seems bigger, right? Because it's like he this, and it wasn't like he just won those fights. Going back to my point of earlier, I think that when you're fighting people, and or any sport, no matter what the sport is, and you're quote unquote going against lesser competition, you need to put that gap, and I think he did put that gap in front of the people's that he was fighting, but you will want to see that run continue to really know where he will be. And I think the Oliveira thing is a good thing because at the time I probably wouldn't have said Oliveira, but now I don't know. Going back to my point of last week, Oliveira just really, even though he's not a new fighter, something about him just seems like he's on a new fighter's run. And I'm actually excited to see kind of more of what Oliveira got up his sleeve going forward.
Yeah, no, good point. And I really like Oliveira as a fighter. My belief is, if you want me to be honest, he probably could move up another weight class, especially if he, do at just a small amount of weight training, because he's still not a big guy for 55. Um, I think he could probably move up another weight class, and with the tools that he has, especially if he can, go up against, because once you get to 170, it's wrestling central, it's heavy. If you can, go up against some of those bigger wrestlers, I think he could be really dynamic because I think his skill set is one that you don't have a lot of at 170. And I think it would cause a lot of people some problems. But just to your Khabib point and to what you were saying, TJ, about when we look at Khabib, and this just going to the Kobe point again, I'll just run off a few of them before he got to the title shot. Abel Trujillo, if everybody remembers him, I don't think he's ever cracked the top 10. Pat Healy, actually, Pat Healy is one of those fighters that I would say is he it was when I talked about dangerous fighters. I like Pat Healy. He's a dangerous fighter, but he wasn't anywhere near a top 5 guy. But I think it was a dangerous fight. Dos Anjos, uh, Daryl Hoisher. I don't even know who that is. Michael Johnson, and
So at
then
that time, Michael Johnson was ranked 7.
hmm and Barbosa was after that,
He was
and then
4.
we had Al Iaquinta. And Al, if I'm not mistaken,
He was 10.
yeah. So you just look at that run. He wasn't beating top 5 guys, but to the point of what I was saying with Kobe, a lot of those guys were still dangerous. Barbosa was dangerous. Michael Johnson was dangerous. Um, Dos Anjos was still dangerous. I think, although most people, unless you are an actual MMA fan, you probably don't know who Pat Healy is, but he was a dangerous guy. I'm just saying, on that title run, that's usually what you get because there's a path to the title. And part of that, and that's where you have your Dos Anjoses in there, part of that is beating an old champion. Exactly what I mentioned that Kobe did. Now, once you can get the title, you start beating those top 5 guys because those are who are next in line for the title shot. And I think that's what you're going to see if you look up most champions. If you want to give a guy a hard path to the championship, you give them the Michael Johnson formula, and you have them, you know, killers that he fought in a row. This guy literally fought, where is it at? Justin Gaethje, Khabib, Portier, Nate Diaz, Dariush, Barbosa, and Galar all in a row. That's crazy, you know. So there are paths to the title. So that was the only reason why I was making that point, because that's what you're going to see for most guys to get that quick path to the title.
Does anybody remember? So that answers all my questions. Then again, I'll let you wrap this one up. But does anybody remember who he was supposed to fight before the Al Alaquinta fight for that championship?
The
I do
Blades.
not.
It was Conor, right?
Was
That's
it?
why Conor showed up in Brooklyn and threw the. Wasn't it Conor was injured or some BS happened?
It
He
was
threw
supposed to be
the.
Ferg.
Oh, it was Tony
Yeah, nope, it
Ferguson.
was Ferg.
Okay,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
Ferguson.
it
Yep.
was. It was Ferg.
So,
I said the
and at that
Blades.
time, there you go. I didn't know if you were talking about Wesley Snipes or
And then
what.
it was Holloway, and then Holloway didn't clear the medicals.
I still want to see that Holloway fight. But so at that point, to like the what Dale just broke down, Ferguson was going to be essentially his hardest test to date. That didn't happen, so it was Al. Al probably gave him one of the more competitive fights he's ever had, and at that point, Al was borderline a journeyman and sort of a real estate agent. He just knew how to wrestle, right? So it was like, damn. And then you got Conor McGregor, who was
And nobody
essentially
gave him a shot at all in that fight.
at all, but he did his job. And then you got Conor McGregor, who at that point was literally like, again, off on a coke binge, but he just came in. Then it was Dustin Poirier, who was a journeyman at 145, made waves at 155, but wasn't quite there. And then the most real like threat that we thought Khabib was going to have was Gaethje, and he tapped him out, and then he left. So it's like he had a really hell of a run in a career, but similar to like how I look at Conor with his belts, it's like you didn't really truly stake your claim as the king of that mountain. And given, I respect the fact that he got out, you know, all BS aside, he got out because he was dealing with personal issues and everything else, but he's still, under 33. He's a healthy young man. He can come back and take that Usman fight or come back and fight for the belt if he wanted to. But I just don't, like, when you look at his legacy 10 years from now and there are more dynamic fighters with longer title defenses, I do feel like he's likely going to fall to the wayside, right? Like, people talk about, like, yeah, he was great, but they won't have a long catalog to run, you know, to lean into, right? And I do think that, like, as fighters, whether MMA or boxing, people fall in love with that whatever number in O. But it's like, I think fans and true fans remember the wars and the battles and the fact that you kept coming back and defending it, you know, your fight, yourself, rather.
I think that
That's all I got to say for the rest of the podcast. I'm out.
I think that his popularity is all I'm saying. Let you go. I think his popularity came more the fact that he beat Conor and Conor was popular. That's when everybody really started hitting him with the he's the GOAT and nobody can beat him, and it's because people had a false perception of what Conor was. And then going back to my cracking and facking thing of earlier, a lot of people are like what we used to call ESPN watchers, and ESPN didn't know nothing but Conor. So if you listen to ESPN, Conor was literally the greatest fighter who's ever lived perpetually, meaning now and forever going forward. So then once he beat Conor, it was like, in people's mind, he has to be greatest of all time because he beat Conor decisively. You know what I mean? And what's crazy is, uh, didn't he fight Nate Diaz too though? But Nate Diaz didn't even get that when he beat Conor, which is like, well, he went up, but they the same weight class. So now it was like, oh, okay, well, he got to be great because he beat Conor. But to your point, we know that quote unquote is easy to get to the belt. It's harder to defend it and really go on that run, which is why people like John Jones and all of them always get more respect for me. And the reason why Conor doesn't get, respect is not the right word. I don't value his titles because he didn't defend them.
Yeah, no, that all that makes sense. And this is what I'll say for the masses. I definitely agree with you, Holiday. But for fight fans, and once again, I know even going back to our group, there were a lot of people that were big on Khabib, damn near, 2 fights into the UFC. And, he came in with a big name. He was with one of the, biggest name camps at that time, AKA. For people that don't know, AKA, they had many champions in the UFC. Although they're much smaller than, like, let's say, like a American Top Team or something like that, they probably had more champions. They had DC, they had Khabib, they had Kane, they had why do I always forget his name? The pretty boy model at 85. Somebody give me his name.
Luke Rockhold.
Luke Rockhold, yeah. So they had like a slew of champions, and quite a few of these guys were champions all at the same time. And so he was out of that camp and of that pedigree. And one of the benefits you get when you come from a big camp like that, there's conversations that happen, especially if that camp is one that's liked by the UFC, where they can put you on a fast track and really put your name out there. And for people, for some reason, there are some people that don't believe that that happens. But if you go back to the fight that just happened with Ngannou and Surreal Gone, um, Surreal's trainer, um, the same one that originally brought Ngannou in, he talked about openly that when he was bringing Surreal Gone over to the UFC and talking to top brass, they asked him, they said, "How do you want us to push this guy?" He said, "I want you to push him as fast as you can. I want you to push him like we did in Gano." That's how he got to the title so fast. So when you've already shown that you can bring certain guys through and you have a certain relationship, there's a very different path to that title shot or to getting a big name, and the UFC will push you. So I know I've said things like that in the past or in our groups, and for some reason people don't believe that that's true, even though this is a whole business. But you can go back and listen to Surreal Gon's trainer, the interviews that he did leading up to that fight, and he talks about it on more than one occasion. So just saying that to say, Khabib, if you're a true MMA fan, Khabib was a big name, and people were putting a badge on, putting a belt around him way before he had the belt. And I was one of those people in the group that just I just didn't see what other people saw, and I still don't see it. But is he one of the best ever? Absolutely. I still got to go with what you were able to do in the UFC, how you were able to control things, and all that has a merit. Anything else before we wrap this up?
Next episode, where we'll rank Iaquinta on the list of pound for pound realtors.
Oh man, you got issues. Okay, I do want to say one thing before we wrap it up. It was something that it don't actually have anything to do with the pound for pound list, but I touched on earlier in Asia how the weight classes work. But I really like what one did with their weight classes. I want to run that down really quick. And then if anybody has anything to say about it, you can say it and then we'll wrap it up. But as I told you all, you got to basically add 10 pounds to the weight class. So they actually start off at straw weight, 125, flyweight 135, bantamweight 145, featherweight 155, lightweight 170, welterweight 185, middleweight. This is where it gets really interesting to me. Middleweight 205, light heavyweight 225, and then heavyweight 265. And the reason why I bring that up, I think this is a much better structure. And this is what people have been calling for in the UFC for a long time, going back to the JDS, Junior Dos Anjos. One of the things that people always said was the problem was he was very much one of those in between guys. He was a little too big for 205, but he was really too small for those big heavyweights. And everybody said if we had a 220, 225-pound weight class, he would be a dominant champion, and I believe that. So, other than me wrapping it up, any comments or anything on that? Okay. Well, this has been a great episode of FatBoy MMA Podcast. I know on this podcast, I threw a couple of jokes out there and everything as we're talking about some of the Russian fighters, but in light of what is going on right now in the world, we do send out prayers to both Russia and the Ukraine. Hopefully, this thing can get resolved quickly, and we have as minimal of people as possible impacted. Once again, thank you for listening to the Fat Boy MMA podcast. Come back again. That wraps up another Fat Boy MMA podcast. If you have a topic for us, please email us at fatboymma55@gmail.com or reach out to us on social media by going to links.fatboymma.com. That's links.fatboymma.com. Thank you for listening.